As a Nigerian, I've never experienced a real natural disaster. We could have a flood here or there. I mean, those things happen everywhere, but the type that would cause real devastation. I'm not saying we've never had anyone that has devastated some people, but in terms of like what I would refer to as natural disasters, we don't have it. And we are really, really blessed in that aspect, plus all the resources that we also have that we can use for the betterment of the people. However, while growing up, I used to imagine how it is with all these other countries that have natural disasters, like countries like Indonesia that has 1,000 volcanoes, the US, Canada, places like this that have all these natural disasters. So someone told me in my penultimate video to check out the worst natural disaster in Canadian history, called the ice storm. That is really not surprising, to be honest. I mean, Canada is known for its cold. I have a lot of friends, like countless of them that immigrated to Canada, so they tell me how cold the country is. But I'm sure this was a bit different from that kind of situation. So let's get right into it.
Montreal, Canada. Its 3.5 million inhabitants are used to extremely severe
Montreal?
winters. They have no choice.
Montreal, really? And I will need to call some of these my Nigerian friends that are there. I mean, this kind of thing happened in Montreal. Wow. I think I know like 3 people personally that stay in Montreal, and probably hundreds or thousands of them that I do not know personally that are from my country that are there. Are they aware of this possibility of things like this happening where they are? I'm sure they don't. Maybe I would let them know.
As bid temperatures and heavy snowfalls of as much as 15 inches at a time bury the city. This city knows bad weather. But there is one kind of winter storm that is the toughest to beat: the ice storm.
So Montreal has got its first forecast of freezing rain. This is all ice. This is absolutely surreal. Look at this. Holy crap. Wow. Everything just gets covered in like centimeter thick layer of ice. I went way further than I expected. Whoa. That is too satisfying. I'm never gonna get sick of that.
Ice storms are created by atmospheric circumstances that are so unique they seem impossible. Unlike New York, just 300 miles to the south, Montreal gets hit by freezing rain an average of 10 days per year. The reasons are location and geography. When warm air from the south meets cold northern air, this creates the ideal conditions above Montreal for extreme winter weather. And because Montreal lies in the midst of the St. Lawrence River Valley, the situation is intensified. As this warm air from the south rides up over the surrounding mountains, it traps the cold polar air in the valley below. As the warm air rises, it releases rain, which falls through the cold layer. The perfect amount of cold air then supercools the rain, causing it to be cold enough to freeze the moment it hits the ground. The longer these
So basically, when they say ice storm, it basically means ice rain, like ice. Instead of drops of water, drops of ice. That can be really dangerous.
conditions remain, the more severe the weather becomes. So if the perfect ice storm were to strike, it would begin on a January day in the skies above Montreal.
It's just surreal, like the entire city just coated with ice. This is honestly so much fun.
A landscape with a beautiful shroud of ice.
Ice formation generally ranges from a trace to 1 inch in accumulation.
But in January 1998, Canada was hit by a storm that was anything but usual.
In 1998, Montreal suffered the most disastrous, tragic, and expensive ice storm in recorded history.
Even for people who grew up in Canada in the eastern part of the country, where winter they take pretty much for granted, have never seen anything quite like this.
The damage here is staggering.
Montreal seems like a city truly under siege tonight as thousands of troops move in on a mission of mercy. In Quebec alone, more than 1 million households, that's up to about 3 million people, left without electricity.
I've never seen anything like this in my life. I never would imagine that something like this could happen. I'm freaking out.
The 98 ice storm was Canada's worst natural.
Smiling could be a form of, handling trauma. So I give her a pass on that.
Disaster affecting over 5.4 million people. or 1/5 of the country's population.
Virtually no one east of Ottawa has power tonight.
The storm blanketed an area larger than the state of Florida.
Sorry for pausing too much. Just mentioning the fact that some part of the country don't have power. I mean, like, that kind of thing is so surreal to me, being from a country that doesn't always have power. So it really, really shows the difference in standard of living from first world countries to third world countries. When they're not being light for a couple of hours or so, or days, can be really, really a disaster.
120 miles by 600 miles.
This is the largest storm event in NYSEG's history. We suffered damage to our electric lines to the tune of about 1,850 miles. One of our engineers equated to a trip from here to Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Over 5 days, multiple layers of ice built up because of the relentless freezing rain that weighed down everything it touched.
During the ice storm in a 5-day period, we had 80 hours of freezing rain that produced 100 millimeters of ice. That's a lot of ice all at one time.
Wow.
Eventually, the city's infrastructure began to collapse.
When you saw electrical pylon suddenly buckle in front of your eyes, you knew right away this was going to be major, major problems.
A total write-off. I mean, we're not talking a repair job, it's a total rebuild.
4 million people lost power.
Oh my God.
A devastating scene across the Champlain Valley and beyond. Thick ice, more than 3 inches in some spots, coating everything.
Over 17 million acres of forest were damaged in northern New England and upstate New York. Some trees carried 40 times their weight in ice.
And across the border, they were devastated. Montreal got hit hard.
Montrealers were burning the wood off their front porches and fireplaces in some cases that hadn't been used for 50 years.
And we saw an incredible sight, these huge power lines that people see driving from the border north to Montreal. Just absolutely
bent right over.
Amazing sight.
And Quebec stayed that way for quite a while.
After the storm, 3,000 kilometers of power lines were destroyed at a cost of over $800 million.
The economic impact of the storm has been devastating. Insurance companies now estimate they'll pay homeowners $500 million to repair their property.
I mean, as an insurance company CEO, this is the kind of day that you pray not to ever see. I mean, insurance is some of the most, like, if you want to look at it, like the most scamish business ever, because your services basically depend on people meeting some kind of once in a lifetime or once in a year, once in something situation. That's the only time that you need to pay up. Meanwhile, you're collecting the insurance money. I'm not sure how you guys charge it in your countries, maybe yearly, monthly, whatever, Meanwhile, you're collecting that regularly. And all you need to do is to pay up once in a lifetime kind of situation. And the person can go their whole lives without ever needing an insurance payout. And despite that, even if something happens to them that they need insurance payouts, insurance companies basically treat them like a bunch of thieves. They'll ask you questions, ask you this, which is fine. Like, that is understandable. You need to, in case someone's trying to fraud you. But it's just so interesting thinking about it. Like, insurance companies will be praying never to meet days like this or periods like this.
Making this the most expensive natural disaster in Canadian history.
The sound of snapping branches and power lines, something that few will ever forget.
We could hear the trees crashing. It sounded like thunder. Some sounded like gunshots. We could hear them just crunching and crashing and going down. My wife and I just sat there and we didn't know what to do.
Man.
In Pakenham, west of Ottawa, listen and you'll hear a forest dying. Like gunfire, the sound of maples falling. This is really tough to see.
Oh, it's awful.
Shirley Fulton's family has been running this sugar bush for 150 years. You shouldn't be able to see the sky here. It'll take 40 or 50 years for the bush to recover.
Meteorologists have called the storm a 100-year event, but what many people don't...
Man, that is so sad. That is so sad. That is so sad. 50 years for you to grow. What? That is their whole livelihood gone. Damn.
Don't realize is that it may take that long for our forests to recover.
Mother Nature doesn't really make rational choices. It can hit anywhere and affect anyone and kill people, injure people, ruin livelihoods without, the blink of an eye. You really, really appreciate the power of nature and the power of weather. And ultimately, no matter how much technology we have, no matter how equipped we are, no matter how prepared we are, people will always be profoundly affected by weather.
Days out from a storm, it's hard to predict exactly what'll happen. But in early January 1998, we saw dangerous conditions headed our way.
This is rain. This is rain that means business.
And we knew it was going to be bad.
You're going to have a major icing problem.
The way it visited itself upon us, it creeped in. It was a couple of days of just that little
January 4th,
little bit of rain,
1998.
little bit, almost mist.
Yeah.
It was just this slow, silent build up until we realized that we were in deep trouble.
It was Monday, January 5th, 1998. Quebecers going back to school and work after the holidays. It wasn't a very nice day.
Too much ice. The ice is terrible. All over the place.
Dave Bronstetter, this is Daybreak on CBC Radio 1940 in Montreal. If you do not have to go out, do not. Unless it is absolutely necessary, stay home.
Highways become skating rinks, and back roads, bobsled runs.
Even if I had to go out, I'm not going out. I mean, what are you really going out for? A job? I mean, if your manager or your superior supervisor, or whoever the fuck he is, except you are in some kind of essential workplace, but if you are just like one of these, corporate offices or something, working in some cubicle or something, I'm not coming. You can fire me if you want. I don't really care. Seriously. Like, I think that kind of situation is enough for people to, prioritize their family over a job. I believe so. Now, there are some jobs in which are essential jobs like medical services or the police or the firefighters, things like that. I understand that. I mean, the oaths in which you take when you get into those kind of vocations require you to, be available in situations like this. But other things that don't really matter in terms of life, I don't really care. You can fire me if you want.
Almost 15,000 trees in Montreal are broken or down. Dozens of streets are closed. Power lines ripped to the ground. Homes and cars damaged.
As I walked up, I said, oh, lucky me, the back windshield has no ice on it. And I got a little closer to find out that I didn't have a back windshield. I don't have much of a front windshield.
The city tries to clean up the mess. Mother Nature keeps making the mess bigger.
The worst neighborhoods are definitely NDG, Maisonneuve, and Rosemont.
Late that afternoon, the city opens 2 shelters for people who have no power and need help. Then, the real power of the storm hits during the afternoon.
So much ice fell that 8 high-voltage power lines crumbled like toothpicks, their cables strewn across a busy highway near Drummondville. Hydro workers have never seen it so bad.
About 400,000 homes are without electricity. More than 600 crews are working to restore power. Here's a look at the...
I mean, I'm sorry to say this again, but I know in a place like Canada, this is a disaster. 400,000 homes without electricity is a disaster. But from where I'm from, more than 1 million homes are without electricity. So I'm not, this kind of thing, I don't really feel that strongly about it because I'm like, okay, whatever. I mean, I'm just going to lose electricity for a couple of days, maximum. I mean, I'm just saying. Obviously, I do understand that everybody has their own different levels of problems. So Canadians not having electricity for a couple of days is a disaster. I don't understand that. It's just something that is just so funny to me to think about comparing it to my own life, or to my countrymen's life. It's really, really, I don't know. Sometimes I just think about it like, and it's not as if these are countries are not capable of giving us this. They are capable of it, but corruption, selfishness, greed, things like that, they don't really care about the people like that. And I'm not saying that politicians in the West care about their people that much, but at least there are some basic amenities in which they are required to offer to their people. In this part of the world, even those basic amenities, if they give it to you, they'll be telling you like, I did this for you. I did this for you. Meanwhile, that is supposed to be a right, not a privilege. But they will be telling you, putting it as part of their political whatever. Oh, I did this in my first term. I mean, what the hell? I mean, it's just so... And they find that people will be like, clapping about it like, oh! A bunch of dumbass sheep.
Area affected by the storm. A region that stretches from in and around Ottawa to Montreal and up the south shore of the St. Lawrence.
We haven't seen anything remotely like this since about February of 1961. We got about 50 millimeters worth of ice. Today, we're getting there. We have about 18 millimeters on the ground, on the cars, on the trees.
Darren Solomon, our reporter, is outside right now to fill us in with some more information. Darren, what's the latest Hydro says about how many customers are without power?
In all of Quebec, 755,000 homes without electricity. In Montreal, on the island, we're talking about nearly 250,000 homes.
Does Hydro have any new estimate about when people will be getting their power back?
Quebec is the French city, right? I think that is the French city where most of the French people of French forefathers settled, right? I think so. You guys can correct me in the comments.
They still say it could take about 3 or 4 days.
The forecast for that night and for the next day, Tuesday, January 6th, was for freezing rain. But that forecast didn't say 4 days of freezing rain. It didn't say the ice storm of the century that's going to turn your lives upside down. But that's what we got. This is a look back when the triangle of darkness descended on the South Shore and when the ring of power around Montreal broke down. This is day 2 of the ice storm crisis in Montreal. The freezing rain has started again. There are still 500,000 homes in the southern part of Quebec that do not have electricity.
Command Center.
Funny enough, I don't know anybody that lives in Quebec. I know a lot of people that I know, like personally, I know like at least 3 people that live in Montreal. I know 2 guys that live in Manitoba, Toronto. I mean, over 10 people. That one is normal. Like so many people that I know that live in Toronto. I mean, that's interesting though. Quebec. Is it big? Do they speak French in that city? It's like, I'm just wondering why, out of all these people that I know, none of them live in Quebec. I'm sure there are some Nigerians that I don't know that are staying there, but it's really interesting to think about.
At Hydro Quebec, workers have been dispatching crews around the clock, trying to deal with one of the biggest blackouts in Quebec history.
So the branches are falling all over the place. They're breaking the wires. We're putting them back up 2 hours after alarms go off, and it just went down again.
Hydro wasn't the only outfit on the road. The city's crews were scrambling to stay on top of the mess.
Across town, several apartments were evacuated. People had used propane-powered generators to stay warm and ended up poisoned by carbon monoxide fumes.
Whoa!
Everyone told Montrealers to keep off the streets. More shelters open for people without electricity.
Do you want a soup, ma'am?
After an emergency cabinet meeting in Quebec, the premier issued a warning.
I think that we must tell the population that they should not hesitate to leave home if they feel like it.
Those who tried to tough it out at home, some people's problems only got worse. This man's house caught fire after using his fireplace for 2 days straight.
It's going to go down in history as the ice storm of '98. It's bad, and it is not over. Hundreds of thousands of people in Montreal and across Quebec are still without electricity right now. Things aren't going to get better fast either. More freezing rain said to be on the way.
It's freezing rain once again tonight, the second wave of a storm system that has caused chaos since Monday night. More than 100 temporary shelters are open, and at least 2 deaths are being blamed on the big freeze. Now, with the freezing rain expected to continue right through the night, the big concern here now is that what is already a very dangerous situation could get even worse.
Bad news, Dennis. The second part of this ice storm is going to be more vicious than yesterday's for 2 simple reasons. We're going to see, in some cases, twice as much ice, and winds, which weren't a factor yesterday, will be a factor tonight into tomorrow.
The ice storm has been locked in place above the city by a huge area of high pressure in the Atlantic Ocean. This system has brought all of the North American weather systems to a standstill. The normal pattern of west to east weather flow is blocked. Montreal is about to be entombed in ice.
I never see so many times a long-lasting freezing rain period like we had Monday into Tuesday.
And meteorologists could offer no words of encouragement. The front of warm, wet air coming from the southern U.S. states will last for days.
Well, I don't want to be pessimistic, but this is objectively what is the situation going to be.
It's not just Canada that's being hammered by these winds and bad weather. The northeastern United States is also being battered very hard by this storm.
Well, the power went off at about 9 o'clock, and then we didn't pay too much attention to it. But we had in the back of our mind the trouble in Canada. They're without power, and this big storm coming with all the ice. What are we going to do? So we started thinking we got to look up a generator.
Up along the Canadian border in the tiny hamlet of Perry's Mills, there's already ice. But at this point, the ice is more spectacle than disaster.
This is going to sound awful, but at first it was kind of exciting because you've never seen anything like this, and you would run from one window to the next and go, oh my.
That is true, though. That is true. I mean, even if it's a terrible thing, disaster and all that, if it's something that you've never seen in your life, it's kind of, exciting. It is to an extent. Then until the reality sets in, then you now realize that, no, it's not a joke. It's not something that I should be looking forward to. It's not something that I should be happy about.
My God, but then it gets terrifying.
North of the border, an eerie preview of what's coming. Trees crashing through cars. More than 500,000 Hydro-Quebec customers in the dark.
This is News Channel 5 at 6.
By the 6 o'clock news, Tom Messner is starting to sound the alarm.
You're going to have a major icing problem. That's what we're thinking about.
Waiting for the day's second computer model.
When I saw that one, I was really concerned because you could see that this was something we hadn't dealt with probably ever.
Overnight, trees and poles weighted down with ice will come crashing down, and the number of people without power and without heat will suddenly skyrocket. What started out as a nasty winter storm is becoming a full-fledged natural disaster.
It's day 3 of the ice storm, and everything in Montreal is covered. Over an inch of ice has accumulated as the continuous freezing rain smothers the city.
That basically like staying in a freezer. Okay, maybe not on freezer level, but you guys can tell me. I've never experienced this in my life. Like, is this on a freezer kind of level? Like, is it on a level of being inside a freezer? I guess the only difference in this situation would be that even though you are in a freezer, but at least you can breathe. Unlike a freezer which will be closed and everywhere will be closed, you can't breathe. So I think that's a bit different than this situation where you are in open air, though you're kind of in a freezer. So guys, tell me, is it as cold as a freezer? I think it should be as cold as a freezer.
Day 3 of Quebec's ice storm crisis. More than 1 million households and businesses across southwestern Quebec mainly are now without power and in many cases heat. The big hit today is on the south shore from Chateauguay and Beauharnois all the way to Boucherville down to Granby. 560,000 plus hydro customers out. What kind of deadline are you holding out for people when things might come back to semblance of normal?
Well, I think it would be realistic not to expect power for a few more days. Some people will be out of power until next week.
Hydro crews are overwhelmed. The federal government sent in
Sorry for laughing. I'm just comparing it to my own reality.
Hundreds of Canadian Forces personnel to help out, but nobody can stop this ice storm. And to help get the power back on, Hydro is calling in reinforcements from the United States.
Hi. How you doing? Good. I've never seen a sea like this here. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Everywhere, trees are breaking, power lines are falling. More and more people are going into the dark.
The situation with power outages on the West Island is changing by the hour, forcing some shelters to close. So if you need a place to stay, call your city hall first and find out what's available. The Aquatic Center in Point Claire will be home to more than 200 people tonight. Residents have to sign up to secure a bed. The shelter is providing food, even entertainment for the kids. It's operating at full capacity, and city officials fear the situation will only get worse.
Going into the fourth day, more and more people give up and head for the shelters.
With no power, it takes less than 72 hours for the temperature of an unheated house to drop dangerously low. And this is when people are more susceptible to unseen dangers.
The brain stops functioning well. You became less able to use your muscles.
The feeling of overwhelming tiredness hits, causing you to fall into what could become a deadly sleep.
The story is we are stuck with this freezing rain and these ice pellets for at least another 24 hours.
By the end of the third day, the storm has taken a firm hold on the city.
I hope the worst is over. Me too.
But for the people of Montreal, the worst is yet to come. The city becomes mummified as it's wrapped tightly in layers of ice. All forms of transportation start to become immobilized. Street by street, parts of the city are now plunged into darkness. But this ice storm is far from over.
Can't go through this route. Grand Isle County's pretty much closed down.
The battle against power outages is a losing one. Since last night, the number of people without power in the Champlain Valley has multiplied 10 times.
Well, it's not just the trees and the ice and the wires. Now we have flooding occurring.
The Winooski is running high, but the real concern is along the Au Sable and the Missisquoi, which is starting to dam up with a mangled mess of trees, branches, and huge chunks of ice.
I've lived here all my life, and this is the first time we've ever seen it up this high. I mean, even in the spring when it gets really bad, this is worse than it's ever been.
Well, this storm is like none that we've ever seen here in the Champlain Valley. It is bad in the Champlain Valley, but it is worse in other places.
Yeah, they're having a lot of problems, as you probably know by now. North of the border, 1 million Canadians have no power, and they've been dealing with this ice since Monday now.
The freezing rain poured down again all night long. When Quebecers woke up Friday morning, more of them were without electricity than ever, and things were about to get worse.
The signs of another bad day came early this morning. The skies rumbled with thunder and then opened up yet again with freezing rain, the fourth straight day.
Day 4, the worst day yet.
I'm going to cry, I think. I'm very tired.
By late tonight, millions of Quebecers will be out of power.
Power is still coming in, but we do not have any backup anymore, so we are in a fragile situation at this moment.
More fragile than we knew. A few days later, the Premier would admit we came close to disaster that Friday. 5 lines supply power to Montreal. Only one was still working.
While Hydro-Quebec desperately tried to calm fears at this press conference, the power went out. The reality is, by the end of the
Whoa, that must have been so embarrassing. Damn. I mean, that reminds me of my country so much. I'm sorry, guys, for bringing up my country all the time, but that reminds me of my country so much. Imagine. Okay, let me not go too deep into it. But just look at that. They're trying to quell the hysteria and everything, and power goes off while they're trying to do that. I would have probably laughed. I'm sorry.
day, 3 million Quebecers were still in the dark.
The Rougemont area is an icy wasteland. The ice is relentless. It covers everything, including the many high-voltage lines that have fallen around here.
The city of Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu is trapped in ice, powerless for 4 days now, damage everywhere.
This town is at the heart of the Triangle of Darkness, a region southeast of Montreal where there is virtually no power and no hope of getting any soon. The buildup of ice here is staggering.
It's hard to imagine just how much ice they got here around Rougemont. Take a look at this bush. Look at the thickness of ice compared to my hand.
Getting any supplies to the South Shore was difficult. Late in the afternoon, the bridges closed. Ice was falling from the superstructures.
People found out the hard way that Montreal's subway trains run on electricity.
For the first time in 30 years, all the metro lines stopped working.
In neighborhood after neighborhood, there is simply no electricity, forcing many residents here to evacuate until power can be restored.
Utility companies say it could take weeks before repairs are made. Nearly 1 million homes and 3 million people are now without electricity. The military has been called out to help. The storm is expected to move out to sea tonight, but forecasters say it will be followed by a major snowstorm. Bill Rediker, ABC News, Montreal.
With this severe of an ice storm, the coating of ice that disabled much of the man-made infrastructure also takes a huge toll on nature. A single 50-foot conifer will accumulate as much as 45 tons of ice during a prolonged period of freezing rain. Many trees won't survive this extra weight.
As ice starts to glaze on trees and power lines, it doesn't look like it weighs that much. Don't be fooled, it does. Get this, one.
Can you imagine? All these trees can go through so much storms, winds, everything over so many number of years, just but a couple of ice. Okay, not a couple. So much weight of ice on them is enough for them to come down. That is crazy.
An inch of ice thickness per 1 foot weighs 7 pounds.
Not only were they down, they looked like they'd been just exploded.
When they hit the ground, they would shatter.
I heard a crack, and right as I looked up, that part of the tree was coming down at me, so I dove out of the way. I never screamed so loud in my life.
Desolation all over the city. The trees, ecological disaster for Montreal.
By the end of day 4, Montreal is weary. The sheer weight of the ice from this storm is crushing the remaining cables and utility poles.
Forecasters are saying the end may be in sight, but clearly it's been getting worse before it gets better. Much of eastern Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes are affected, but nowhere is it bleaker tonight than right here in Montreal.
One of the worst places to be in Canada today was downtown Montreal. Till now, it had been almost untouched by the catastrophic blackouts, but tonight, it too was hit.
This is the view from Montreal's Lookout, a city in the depth of darkness after the most difficult day of this crisis so far.
I figured it's a total blackout because if downtown has no light, there's probably none at all in my area.
1.3 million customers of hydro. That means there are more than 3 million Quebecers who still tonight have no power. These 4 days have been a constant battle against the force of nature.
Wow.
Where it could be weeks before.
That particular part, you know this part?
4 days have been a constant battle.
This part like this is like normal thing in my country. Normal thing. This, as you're seeing this part like that, is dark. Clearly, there's no light. I mean, when I see some of these Western cities, you know, all this, not just Western cities, like almost all the countries in the world have electricity now. Just some countries in Africa are just so messed up to a point where it's actually embarrassing at this point. It's not even something I should, like in 2023, countries shouldn't even be going through lack of electricity. Seriously. Like, but Africa, I think Africa is cursed. That's just my own opinion. I think it's cursed. There's no hope in the continent. Even the recent military takeovers and all that, I mean, that is all good. That's all well and good to be happy about. But at the end of the day, you think these people are going to do any better? I'm not sure about that. So I just think, I don't know what happened in the fabric of Africa. There's something that happened at some point in which people lost the love for their neighbors or for their citizens. I don't know. Like the fact that you can sit down in a place of power and sit down there and embezzle 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 to a point that your 10th generation will not even be able to finish the money. And people around, even on your streets, are suffering. You don't even care. I really do not understand that, but I don't know. I think I don't think other parts of the world act this way. I think it's just an African thing, in my opinion.
Against the force of nature, and where it could be weeks before power is restored.
Tonight, Montreal is a city marked by great swaths of darkness, with the odd island of light.
Tom, it has been an incredible evening here on the island of Montreal. With each passing hour, more bad news coming. What's the latest?
Well, the big development on the island of Montreal is that one of the two plants that supply water to the millions of people who live here, one of those two plants is down. It is not functioning.
One of two main water treatment facilities servicing 15 municipalities has gone down.
So on top of all of the misery, the blackout, the cold houses, no heat, and this has been going on for 4 days, on top of that, there's a large chunk of the population of Montreal tonight that does not even have water. The situation in this city tonight is really, truly desperate.
I guess if there's any good news at this moment, it's what's falling in front of you there. It's snow, and that means it's not freezing rain, but it also means it's getting colder, and that brings with it its own dangers. Tom Kennedy reporting to us tonight from the streets of Montreal. The people of Montreal have been taking everything this storm could throw at them, and they have persevered.
Well, I think Montrealers, I think they're hardy by nature, and I think that basically they're going to cope with this, and they've coped with other things.
At the Westin Hotel on the dark side of Sherbrooke Street, hotel employees guided guests to their rooms and the hotel's restaurant, where a cold buffet and some hot music kept up their spirits.
Basically, we want to keep people busy, change their mind, because everyone is fairly stressed.
In the shelter I visited today, I found people in remarkably good spirits, remarkably grateful to and patient with the people who are helping them.
Things are bound to get better because right now many are saying they just can't get much worse.
Then we lost power for more than half of the province.
The ice formed by freezing rain is the toughest ice on Earth.
The main reason for that is there's very few air bubbles in the water droplet.
The storm has now laid down a solid pack of ice of over 4 inches deep, thicker than a sidewalk slab and just as strong. Once the ice layers reach over 4 inches deep, their sheer weight threatens every major structure. And there is nothing more important to a city in crisis than the giant steel transmission towers that bring its power. The freezing rain has spread over an area of 70,000 square miles, taking out towers across the entire region. Montreal sits on an island connected to the outside world by bridges and tunnels. It receives its power by highly vulnerable power lines. The city relies almost exclusively on hydroelectric power, generated far to the north in James Bay and Labrador. This creates a logistics problem. It takes over $15 billion worth of transmission lines, almost enough to reach once around the world, to feed electricity to the power-hungry South. Ultimately, 8 main high-voltage transmission lines bring over 20 gigawatts of power to the city. Right now, any power to Montreal will rely on these delicate arteries that are covered in ice. One by one, 6 of the 8 power lines that feed Montreal have collapsed. The last line into the north of the city is groaning under the extreme weight of ice, and one ice-laden line hangs on to the east. Each cable is now carrying weight over 10 times its design load, the equivalent to a person hanging on every 10 feet. Montreal's only remaining lifelines are at the breaking point. Now the giant towers that have held out against the ice face their final test.
At the end of the day, on last Thursday, we really thought that we might leave Montreal, that we might have a total blackout in the Montreal area. It was something like a disaster. Only one line. The line was watched by all people the whole night.
In a last desperate bid to save the only power line left, the energy companies literally take matters into their own hands, smashing it off by hand.
A delicate operation to de-ice the line.
I mean, can you imagine that? They have to be very, very careful with that. Like, that is crazy. They have to be absolutely very, very careful. You can't just be hitting it and no, you have to be like... Wow.
A crew hovering in an armed forces helicopter dropping logs on the line to knock the ice off.
Overshooting. Nose to maximum.
Unconventional, unprecedented, but it worked.
As the sun rises, Montreal breathes a collective sigh of relief. Remaining power lines were saved, and much-needed power slowly returns to the city.
Dawn, can you give us the good news we've been waiting for?
Deborah, there is good news tonight. Dear friends at home, we can tell you we can now bring closure to the worst ice storm on record. The changeover has taken place. We've got light flurries falling in the greater Montreal area. As for ice, forget it.
After the big freeze, the big thaw. Ahead, the long process of recovery and cleaning up.
This window of decent weather may be very small. It's supposed to get colder and colder over the next few days. So you can imagine what went on here today, a huge effort to make the most of this opportunity, to get ice off bridges, to clear debris off the streets, most of all to restore power to the city of Montreal.
This was an uneasy calm after the storm. Downtown Montreal, much of it still without power, was turned into a massive pedestrian mall. Dozens of streets were closed, too dangerous to pass. Ice, huge chunks of it, continued to rain down from above. Despite the break in the weather,
Whoa! No! That is that is dangerous. What the hell? That is so dangerous. What? I mean, well, I don't want to laugh about this. This is a very serious thing. I don't want to laugh about this, but seriously, I would have stayed at home. I would have stayed in my house, seriously, because this is fuck the job. Whatever job I was doing, fuck it. I'm not doing it. What? This thing will not fall on your head.
Life has not returned to normal, far from it. Montrealers were told not to drink the tap water. That prompted a rush on bottled water. This store was cleaned out.
Wow.
Even one of the proudest symbols of the city, hockey's Montreal Canadiens, couldn't escape the effects of the storm. Their game against New York tonight was postponed.
On the first day of relief from the onslaught of ice pellets, there was still shell shock from the ravages of the ice war.
This looks like worse than any hurricane I've ever seen. I mean, the West Island, I thought where we are was pretty bad, but this is incredible. This is devastation.
I was in Winnipeg yesterday. It's the first time in my life I wish I stayed in Winnipeg.
People start to venture out, inspecting the damage.
What is wrong with Winnipeg? Is Winnipeg a terrible city, a boring city? I mean, that comment just seems like, I mean, normally nobody would like to stay in Winnipeg, right? Nobody would like to stay there.
And telling stories of another harrowing night.
I can't believe it. This is the first time I've seen it. It's really sad. I feel bad for a lot of these people.
You know, it's like a war zone, you know? It's just, I can't get over how bad it was.
And as the power crews begin to get back up, they also begin to get almost unbelievable estimates about outages. Nearly 200,000 customers out in Vermont and northern New York. More than 500,000 people.
NYMO says, get this, 99% of its customers are without power.
That's in the northern part of New York. That's unbelievable.
I've never seen an ice storm of this nature. You go through even the main streets, forget about the back streets, and you see the trees and the power lines down, and you just realize that this is something that's going to take quite some time to get over.
In Kingston, close to 75% of the area remains in the dark. That's because Ontario's Hydro's two main lines are down.
Mid-morning, an unprecedented step.
I am declaring, as of 10 a.m. this morning, a state of emergency in Ottawa-Carleton.
The scope of this disaster is hard to take in, especially in the area that took the biggest hit, Montreal's South Shore. No one has escaped. Nearly every household, every business is blacked out in a string of cities and towns that have become known as the Triangle of Darkness.
You can see what happened right here. Even small wires became like thick, heavy cables of ice.
Man.
In some of the areas around here, which is just south of Montreal, the whole distribution system has collapsed, and it could take weeks to get it back to normal.
Weeks?
We met up with this.
Just weeks? Man, I really envy you guys, man. I really envy you guys in these countries. Weeks? My country, this could take 2 years for it to come back. This kind of power lines, like the main power lines, not the other smaller ones, the main ones. Man. Okay, let me not go 2 years. Let me not embarrass my country. Let me just put it to 1 year. Let me just give them the benefit of the doubt. 1 year, I guess. 1 year. It's not like they're not capable. The money is there. They're capable of doing it, but someone will give them that contract and they will try to embezzle the money. Like
Convoy of linemen who drove to the South Shore all the way from Long Island, New York. They worked for a Connecticut-based power utility, and to our surprise, most were of French-Canadian heritage.
I'm originally stands at Quebec.
And what's your name, sir?
Remy Perrault.
Another francophone.
Yeah, we're working in down New York right now, but we came up here to help everybody.
CTV's Genevieve Bushman and her camera operator were reporting on the storm on the outskirts of Montreal in an area that is particularly hard hit. A hydro tower came crumbling to the ground, buckling under the staggering weight of the ice. The tower brought with it power lines attached to the massive steel structure. The CTV crew was trapped, wires surrounding them on all sides. And you were trapped there for how long?
Well, we were trapped there for several hours, actually. There was these massive high-tension wires around us, so we didn't know whether we could move at all.
As we've heard, people are dying and collapsing from use of barbecues, propane, and other heaters inside their powerless homes. And they're ignoring warnings about touching wires or cutting trees down. With the power out, it's more a question of not hearing the warning in the first place.
35 people died in this disaster, and 500,000 people were forced from their homes. In the end, it left $5 billion in damage. Oh.
Hi, I'm home. I have power.
Oh, I feel really great to be home.
Finally, progress. Emerging from darkness, the lights are coming back on.
After what was quite literally the darkest weekend in Montreal's modern history, at last there was light. By daybreak, power was back in the downtown core. Regular business was not.
Downtown officials say the roof of the Eaton Center is in danger of collapsing under pressure from thick ice in Montreal. There had been an earlier report that the roof had collapsed and 100 people taking shelter in the complex had to evacuate.
Electric utility workers from across North America, the Army, and just about anyone who could lend a hand was trying to get the lights back on and clean up the mess. One of the first things to do was to get rid of the tons of ice. There were some unique ways of doing it, like the team of police sharpshooters getting the ice off a communications antenna.
Wow!
In Montreal, most people will have electricity in a day or two. Here on the South Shore, hundreds of thousands of people will stay in the dark for 2 more weeks.
This crew is one of about 10 working in the area of Saint-Hyacinthe, a city with no power for a week. The men are working from 12 to 18 hours a day. The pylons are taking shape quickly. Cable lies waiting to be strung, but it takes time. The lines here will not be up, the foreman says, before next week.
And as temperatures plunged to -20, a major operation was underway to convince people without power to leave their homes.
After about a week or so, 8 days, I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore because it was way too cold. I realized when I stepped out of the apartment, it was an old 4-story building built in the 20s. The hallway was totally dark. I realized that everybody was out of the building. I was the last one to leave.
As night falls, the temperature drops. Wind chills tonight will hit -30, the coldest since this crisis began more than a week ago. Firewood and other supplies are pouring in from other parts of Quebec, Canada, and the United States.
We're coming out of Richmond, Virginia, and we're bringing the beds and the tents for the people to sleep in. My dispatcher called me and said, well, we got an emergency. We got people up there in Canada that's sleeping outside in these beds. And I told him, I said, well, I'll be in.
This storm is more than just freezing rain and downed power lines. It's also people coming together to help. Neighbors helping neighbors. People volunteering for countless hours in shelters. And the kindness of strangers.
The guy that came around the corner and hooked me back up to the electricity came in a truck that had a Massachusetts license plate on it.
Oh, yeah.
And this kid looked like Adonis, the Greek god of electricity hooking up, you know? I was never happier in my life.
And more signs things were getting back to normal. Schools started reopening.
Did you enjoy your extended Christmas holiday? Yes. You did?
Yeah.
You you enjoy being home without power?
And everyone had a special story to tell about his or her extra long vacation.
I had an oven stove.
You had an oven stove?
Yeah,
What's an oven stove?
I mean a wood stove.
A wood stove.
In the fridge, some of our things
stove.
went bad, but we're still okay. And my mom now is like
We call it in this side firewood.
going for groceries today.
You wonder exactly how we survived that devastating ice storm of '98? Just look to your neighbors.
Everybody was in it together. You were without power, so were 20,000 other people right around us, and didn't have it any worse than anybody else. But you helped your neighbor, and your neighbor helped you.
Adversity, somehow, has brought out the best in people.
I think it's everybody's working together and enjoying it.
It's made people far more human and realize that what we can do for each other.
A little laugh therapy to lighten things up.
I don't know. I feel like the modern world these days is so individualistic to a point where if this were to happen now, would people be comrades with each other like it was, or it would be like, people be trying to loot? I mean, I don't know. I just have a very, very cynical view of the world these days because of the kind of things that I see. And it really makes me to not really expect that much from other humans, to be honest with you. I was like, if this kind of thing happened in my country, I'm not sure it would be a bunch of, kumbaya, let's work with each other, help each other out and all that. It would be a bunch of looting, some robbery and things like that. So I don't know, maybe because I'm from a third world country, so maybe my view is a bit different, but these Western countries are not that better anyway. I mean, from what I see, some of these Western countries are even more violent than where I am. Seriously, at least from the news anyway. Maybe the news is just sensationalizing what is happening. It's exaggerating what is happening, but I don't know. I'm not really sure this would be the case if this kind of thing happens now.
Considering the time that we're all facing right now, it's been very stressful for our family and for a lot of people around here, so it's definitely very uplifting.
Show you that people care, They really do care.
I've actually been helping out today, so it's given me something to do.
Now, could I judge by your accent that you may never have seen anything like this before?
No, we're from England, so we've only been here a year, so we're still coping with the Canadian weather, let alone this. So.
Well, you only see this once in a lifetime, they say,
yes,
such as this.
Yes.
What were some of the lessons learned from this? You mentioned generators. I think a lot more people and farms have generators now.
Well, there are probably lessons learned, but it's going to be so long before something like this happens again. We'll probably have to learn all over again.
Mother Nature reminded us that she can still wreak havoc with our high-tech modern way of life with almost no warning in a way we almost never expected. We also learned that here in Quebec, more people heat with electricity than in just about any other part of the world. But what we should really remember is how much we depended on our friends and our neighbors, on strangers from nearby and from far away.
From a meteorologist's point of view, this was certainly the most interesting thing I've ever seen. I mean, it was mind-boggling what was going on.
As far as I'm concerned, it's definitely the biggest weather-related thing I've ever covered in my life.
And no doubt, most of us who lived through it will never forget the ice storm of '98.
1997 was said to be the warmest year on record. In fact, since records were kept at all.
A lot of folks think that the ice storm of '98 was a once-in-a-lifetime event, but the reality is it will happen again.
Milder winters may mean the conditions to create the perfect...
It will happen again. Milder weathers. I need to tell this my friends. It's like, I don't know, some of them don't even know all these things. Just the main point is just leave this shithole of a country. They don't even care about where they are going to. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them whatsoever. I mean, I know a guy that went to Indonesia. I was asking him, dude, you know there are volcanoes in that country? He said, what? Volcano? What is that? That's what he told me. Volcanoes, what is that? Dude, you don't know the country that you are going to. This country, this Nigeria is so blessed. We don't have any of these natural disasters whatsoever. It's just that we have so many terrible leaders, terrible people that just don't even care about their neighbors whatsoever. So they just embezzle and embezzle and embezzle for their own family. They don't really care about the people around them. If not, like, Nigeria is like the perfect place to be. No natural disasters, a gazillion resources. I mean, hardworking people, smart, hardworking people. Unfortunately, all those things come with some disadvantage. I don't know whether it's, sometimes I feel if people that are not in power, if they get into power, would they also behave like that? I don't even, from what I've seen, they also behave like that as well. So maybe I would behave like that if I also enter power. I don't really know. I really do not know. But the whole thing is just so frustrating and so hopeless that, anyway.
Perfect ice storm could be just around the corner.
Yeah. Wow, man, that was interesting. That was really interesting. Thank you guys for that suggestion. Someone told me to watch this, and I'm really glad I watched it. Wow, this is, I mean, like, this video is really interesting to me because most Nigerians these days, when they want to immigrate, they go to Canada instead of the United States because US is kind of a bit overcrowded at this point. So, like, I think it's a bit, Canada is still though it's a developed country, it's still kind of a growing population, you know. So there's a bigger chance of an upward mobility in Canada compared to the United States. So most people that I know, and most Nigerians, to be honest, they immigrate to Canada. So this is a very relatable video for me because I know like 3 people personally that live in Montreal. 3 personally. And there are countless from my country that are living there. And I can bet that most of them don't know about this. I will call some of them and ask them, dude, what do you think about this? Do you know about this? This could happen. You are staying in Montreal. This could happen. Most of them don't really care. At the end of the day, you know, when you come from a very desperate situation, what do you really care about the host? Like, I mean, was it really, in terms of disaster, a lot of people lose their lives? That's what people in my country will look at. Like, okay, it will happen. The authorities will handle it, and we'll all go back to our lives. That's how they will look at it. They will look at it like, oh, this is such a disaster. This is what happens when you come from a very, very hopeless society that every time you look at things, you just look at it like there's no hope whatsoever. Like there's just no hope. Everything that happens just reminds you how hopeless you are. So at the end of the day, what choice do you have? Is to make that move, make that bold move. And even if you go and experience some ice storms, experience some volcanoes, experience some tornadoes, hurricane, whatever, you're fine with it. I mean, you only experience it like once in a lifetime. So who cares? You don't look at it like, okay, if it happens, it happens. Because it's so bad. It's just so bad. And it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. But the leaders are so heartless, so selfish, so greedy to a point that and most of you that are watching this video don't really care about this. So let me not go down that road. Anyway, guys, I really enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think. Did you experience this ice storm? If you are watching this, did any of your family, your dad, your whoever, did they experience this ice storm? I know some of you that have been watching it may not have been born by then. Maybe someone that you know in your family experienced it. Let me know how it went for all of you. I would really like to know, and I will be replying to all of you in the comment section. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you guys for watching. Like the video on your way out to get the video out to more people. See you on the next one. Peace.